The breaking point. The hegemony's central chamber stretched a kilometer into the artificial atmosphere of Station Alpha, its crystalline walls refracting starlight into rainbow cascades. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the petitioner's podium, her daughter Maya's small hand clasped tightly in hers. The 12-year-old girl's eyes were wide with wonder as she watched the various alien species filling the towering chamber's discussion rings. The Human Cooperative extends its offer of humanitarian aid to the Nexari people. Sarah's voice carried clearly through the chamber. Our agricultural specialists have developed resistant strains of compatible food crops that could end the famine in their outer colonies within 1 standard year. Murmurs rippled through the assembled representatives. The Nexari delegation's bioluminescent patterns flickered with hope, but Supreme Counselor Vaxtith of the hegemony merely adjusted his ceremonial mantle, multiple eyes narrowing. The hegemony appreciates Earth's generous offer, he said, mandibles clicking in what Sarah had learned to recognize as barely concealed disdain. However, we cannot allow unregulated human biological materials to enter hegemony space. The risk of contamination is too great. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her grip on Maya's hand tightened slightly. The crops have passed all standard safety protocols. We've submitted complete genetic sequences and protocols designed for civilized species, interrupted Under Counselor Zentak. The insectoid's carapace gleamed with status markings as he rose from his seat. Not for a species barely 2 centuries into faster-than-light travel. Maya tugged at her mother's hand. But Mom, you said the crops were safe. Why won't they? Silence. Zentak's command cracked through the chamber. The young one shows the typical human disregard for proper procedure. No child should be present during council deliberations. Sarah drew Maya closer. My daughter is here as part of her diplomatic training, as permitted under Article 7 of the chamber's lights suddenly flashed red. Warning klaxons blared as armored security forces poured in through multiple entrances. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched them surround the podium. We have detected unauthorized transmission signals, Vaxtith announced, rising to his full height, originating from the human delegation's position. That's impossible, Sarah protested. We submitted all our devices for screening. It's just my holodiary. Maya held up her wrist device. I was recording the meeting for my school project. Ambassador Kexley said it was okay. The Nexari ambassador's bioluminescence pulsed in confirmation, but Vaxtith's expression hardened. A convenient excuse. Security scans indicate the device contains encrypted sections. The human child has been caught attempting to steal hegemony secrets. The guards moved closer, weapons raised. Sarah pushed Maya behind her. She's a child. The encryption is standard privacy protection. We'll surrender the device immediately. The penalty for espionage is clear under hegemony law. Zentak's voice carried a note of cruel satisfaction. No exceptions. Time seemed to slow as Sarah saw the guards' weapons charging. She spun, trying to shield Maya with her body, but strong arms grabbed her, pulling her away. Maya's scream pierced the chamber as the guards surrounded her. Mom. The flash of energy weapons burned afterimages into Sarah's retinas. The screaming stopped. When her vision cleared, she saw Maya's small form crumpled on the chamber floor, her holodiary still clutched in lifeless fingers. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah's legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees. Around the chamber, even those representatives who had always supported the hegemony's harsh policies looked shocked at the execution of a child. Let this serve as a reminder. Vaxtith's voice cut through the silence. The hegemony's laws apply to all, regardless of age or species. The human delegation is hereby expelled. You have 1 standard hour to leave the station. Sarah didn't remember being escorted from the chamber. She didn't remember the journey back to the Earth ship docked at the station. She came back to herself only when Captain Laura Rivera gripped her shoulders in the ship's medbay. Ambassador Chen. Sarah. Look at me. Laura's face swam into focus. We need to make the jump to FTL. The hegemony's given us a countdown. Sarah looked down at her hands. They were still stained with Maya's blood from when she'd finally been allowed to hold her daughter's body. They killed her, Laura. My baby. They killed her for taking notes in her diary. I know. Laura's voice cracked. God help me, I know. We all saw it on the feeds. But right now, we need to. Send it. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. What? The signal. Send it now. Sarah looked up, and Laura took an involuntary step back at the expression in her eyes. Authorization, Chen Alpha 001. Execute Protocol Lazarus. Laura's face paled. That's real. I thought it was just a conspiracy theory, a backup plan if the hegemony ever. Now, Captain, send it before we jump. They killed my daughter for nothing more than being human. It's time they learned exactly what that means. Laura swallowed hard and pulled out her secure comm unit. With trembling fingers, she input a series of commands. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, ancient receivers started humming to life, awakening systems that had waited decades for this signal. As their ship jumped to FTL, Sarah Chen closed her eyes. She could still feel Maya's small hand in hers, still see her daughter's wonder at the alien chamber. The hegemony thought they had taught humanity a lesson about power. Instead, they had just started a war they weren't prepared to fight. In the darkness between stars, humanity's hidden fleet began to stir. Project Lazarus. Admiral James Chen stood in the heart of Olympus Command, buried deep within Mars' Valles Marineris. The facility had remained dormant for decades, its existence known only to a select few. Now, as emergency lights pulsed along dormant corridors, the weight of humanity's most closely guarded secret pressed down on his shoulders. The massive holographic display before him showed the solar system in perfect detail, with hundreds of points of light beginning to pulse in previously empty sectors. Each light represented a hidden installation, a cache of weapons, or a dormant warship. Humanity's insurance policy was finally paying off. Status report, he commanded, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within him. He'd received the news about Maya hours ago, but there would be time for grief later. Now his daughter needed him to be an admiral first and a father second. Colonel Sofia Martinez stepped forward, her dark eyes reflecting the glow of the tactical display. Project Lazarus facilities are reporting in across the system, sir. Titan Base is online. The Jupiter shipyards are beginning reactor startup sequences. The Venus defense platforms are charging weapons systems. And the Nemesis fleet. Sophia's lips curved in a grim smile. The stealth fields are dropping now, sir. You should see them on the display in 3, 2, 1. New signals bloomed across the hologram like stars igniting. Massive warships, hidden in plain sight throughout the solar system, began revealing themselves. Some emerged from the atmospheres of gas giants where they'd lurked for years, disguised as storms. Others rose from the ocean floors of Europa and Enceladus, still more decloaked from within the asteroid belt, where they'd masqueraded as common space rocks. Beautiful, aren't they? A new voice joined them. Dr. Elena Volkov, Project Lazarus's chief scientist, walked onto the command platform. The elderly woman moved with the help of a grav-assist cane, but her eyes were sharp as ever. 30 years of my life, gone into those ships. The hegemony thinks their technology is superior. They never wondered why we seemed so content with our primitive systems. James nodded. Every piece of technology humanity had shared with the galactic community had been carefully crafted to appear less advanced than it actually was. Even their FTL drives, which the hegemony considered crude and inefficient, were merely the tip of the iceberg. "Show me the Thanatos," James requested. The hologram zoomed in on a massive vessel emerging from Saturn's rings. Over 3 kilometers long, its hull was covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow, making it difficult for the eye to focus on any one section. "Quantum metamaterial plating," Elena explained proudly. "Not only does it make our ships nearly impossible to target, but it can also absorb and redirect energy weapons. The hegemony's favorite toys will be useless against it. How many ships total? James asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd helped plan this contingency, never truly believing they'd have to use it. 743 capital ships, plus support vessels, Sophia reported, all crewed by volunteers who've trained in secret for years, waiting for this day. They've lived double lives, maintained cover stories, all to be ready when humanity needed them. James watched as more ships revealed themselves. Each vessel represented countless sacrifices, not just in resources, but in the lives of those who dedicated themselves to this secret mission. While the rest of humanity went about their lives, these men and women had prepared for war. Sir, Sophia's voice grew hesitant. There's something else you should see. The Nexari delegation. They're requesting asylum. James raised an eyebrow. The species we were trying to help before. Yes, sir. It seems the hegemony's response to Maya's death shocked them as much as it did us. They've transmitted detailed intelligence on hegemony fleet movements, defense systems, everything. They say there are others who would stand with us, species who've suffered under hegemony rule for centuries. The enemy of my enemy, Elena mused. Perhaps we won't have to fight alone after all. James studied the tactical display, watching as humanity's hidden fleet continued to assemble. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, incorporating technologies that would revolutionize warfare. But more importantly, each represented hope. Hope that humanity could break free from the hegemony's oppression. Hope that they could build a better future. Send word to all commands, he ordered. Project Lazarus is now fully activated. Priority targets are hegemony military installations only. We're not here for revenge. We're here to liberate. With all due respect, sir, Sophia's voice was soft. They killed your daughter. James closed his eyes for a moment, seeing Maya's face in his mind. Yes, they did. And they did it because they believe we're savages who only understand violence. We're going to prove them wrong. We'll fight with precision, with purpose, and with honor. Not just for Maya, but for every species that suffered under their rule. The command center hummed with activity as orders were relayed throughout the fleet. On hundreds of ships, crews who had trained for years in secret finally took their stations. Weapons systems charged, engines warmed, and humanity's hidden armada prepared for its first real battle. One last thing, James said, turning to Elena. The Prometheus Protocol. Is it ready? The scientist's eyes widened. You want to deploy that already? We've never tested it in actual combat conditions. The hegemony believes they can cut us off from FTL travel, strand us in our own system. James' expression hardened. I want them to understand exactly how wrong they are. Prepare the protocol for system-wide deployment. As Elena hurried off to make the necessary arrangements, James turned back to the tactical display. Somewhere out there, the hegemony's fleets were mobilizing, confident in their technological superiority. They had no idea that humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment, developing technologies that would change the face of warfare forever. Maya loved the stars, he whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. Let's make sure they're safe for the next generation. The Awakening. The hegemony's primary defense fleet hung in high orbit above Centauri Prime, their formation perfect and imposing. 1,200 ships arranged in the traditional crescent of dominance. Supreme Commander Vexhall stood on his flagship's observation deck, watching as his forces prepared to crush the upstart humans once and for all. Status report on the human fleet, he demanded, his crystalline exoskeleton catching the light of the binary stars. Still approaching on their predictable vector, Supreme Commander, his tactical officer responded. Their drives are primitive, just as our intelligence suggested. They'll enter weapons range in approximately 20 minutes. Vexhall's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. And their numbers. 700 ships, roughly. Larger than expected, but no match for. The tactical officer's words cut off as alarms suddenly blared throughout the ship. The space around the human fleet seemed to ripple and distort, like heat waves rising from desert sand. Where there had been empty void, hundreds of additional ships simply appeared, their hulls shifting with patterns that hurt the eye to look at. Impossible. Vexhal's crystalline fingers dug into the railings. Their stealth technology can't be this advanced. Where did they? New contacts. The tactical officer's voice rose in panic. Behind us. Above. They're everywhere. The tactical display told a nightmare story. Human ships were appearing in all directions, their quantum metamaterial hulls finally revealing themselves. They had somehow surrounded the entire Hegemony fleet while remaining completely undetected. Aboard the Thanatos, Admiral James Chen watched the Hegemony's perfect formation begin to fracture. All ships, execute Protocol Prometheus. Target their FTL drives first. Let's show them what real human technology can do. Across the battlefield, humanity's hidden fleet unleashed its first strike. But instead of conventional weapons, ripples of strange energy pulsed outward from each ship. Where these waves touched Hegemony vessels, their FTL drives simply stopped. Not destroyed, not damaged, but fundamentally altered at the quantum level. By the first light, Alina Volkov's voice came over the command channel, filled with professional satisfaction. The Prometheus protocol is performing even better than our simulations suggested. Their quantum field matrices are completely destabilized. They won't be jumping anywhere. Sir, Sofia Martinez called from her tactical station. The Nexeri were right. Look at the Hegemony's secondary vessels. The ones crewed by their subject species. They're not returning fire. Some are actively turning their weapons away from our ships. James nodded grimly. Broadcast on all frequencies, all languages. Tell them this is their chance. The Hegemony's grip is breaking. Anyone who stands down will be treated fairly under Earth's Articles of War. The response was immediate. Across the battlefield, nearly a third of the Hegemony's fleet powered down their weapons. Some even turned their guns on their former masters, centuries of resentment finally finding an outlet. Vexhal watched in horror as his perfect formation collapsed into chaos. Launch all fighters. Target their command ships. Show these primitives why the Hegemony has ruled for 10,000 years. Swarms of Hegemony strike craft poured from launch bays, their energy weapons spitting death into the void. But as they approached the human ships, something strange happened. The geometric patterns on the Earth vessels' hulls began to shift and flow more rapidly, and incoming fire simply vanished. The metamaterial absorption is holding, Elena reported calmly. Their energy weapons might as well be flashlights. Shall we demonstrate our own fighter technology, Admiral? James checked the tactical display one final time. Launch the Furies. From the larger human ships, smaller craft emerged. But these were like no fighters the galaxy had ever seen. They moved with impossible agility, their hulls wrapped in the same shifting patterns as their motherships. But more remarkably, they seemed to predict where enemy fire would be, moving out of the way before weapons even discharge. Quantum precognition drives, Elena explained over the general frequency, her voice carrying a teacher's pride. The fighters are technically calculating and reacting to weapons fire a fraction of a second before it happens. The pilot's neural interfaces let them process the information fast enough to use it. The space around the Hegemony fleet erupted into chaos as the Furies engaged. The smaller craft danced through enemy formations with surgical precision, their weapons striking with perfect accuracy, while enemy fire passed harmlessly through the spaces they had occupied microseconds before. On the Thanatos' bridge, James watched the tactical display with mixed emotions. Every ship they destroyed carried thinking, feeling beings. But he couldn't forget Maya's face, couldn't unhear Sarah's broken voice, as she'd activated the signal that brought this fleet to life. Sir, Sophia's voice cut through his thoughts. The Hegemony's flagship is targeting their own surrendered vessels. They're going to fire on their own people rather than let them defect. James's expression hardened. Target the flagship. All batteries, focused fire. Show them exactly what happens when they sacrifice innocent lives. The Thanatos' primary weapons array came alive. But instead of conventional energy beams or projectiles, circles of strange distortion appeared in space around the Hegemony flagship. Reality itself seemed to warp and bend. Localized space-time manipulation, Elena commented. What they're about to experience is, technically speaking, the same moment in time about 30 times in a row. Rather disorientating, I expect. The Hegemony flagship froze in space, caught in a temporal loop. When it emerged 30 seconds later, its crew was completely incapacitated, the ship drifting powerless. All ships, hold fire, James broadcast. To all Hegemony forces, your flagship is disabled. Your FTL capabilities are neutralized. A third of your fleet has already surrendered. You have 5 minutes to power down your weapons, or we will be forced to demonstrate even more of humanity's primitive technology. The battlefield fell silent as the remaining Hegemony ships faced their moment of truth. One by one, power signatures dropped as vessels stood down. Within 4 minutes, the battle was over. Send in the boarding teams, James ordered. Secure their command staff. And get me a channel to Earth. The Hegemony needs to understand. This was just the beginning. Either they end their oppression of other species and begin immediate peace negotiations, or we'll be paying their homeworld a visit next. As cleanup operations began, James walked to the observation deck. Somewhere out there, he knew Sarah was watching the news feeds. This victory wouldn't bring Maya back, but perhaps it would mean no other parent would have to suffer as they had. The galaxy's about to change, he whispered to the stars. I hope we're ready for what comes next. Shattered alliances. The grand chamber of the Hegemony lay in shadows, its once pristine crystalline walls now webbed with stress fractures from the recent fighting. Where once thousands of representatives had gathered, now only a handful remained. The emergency session had been called with minimal notice, but its importance couldn't be overstated. The future of galactic civilization hung in the balance. Sarah Chen stood at the same podium where her daughter had died, her face carved from stone. But this time, she wasn't a petitioner. Behind her, the quantum-shifted hull of the Thanatos was visible through the chamber's transparent ceiling, its presence a silent reminder of humanity's newfound power. The terms are non-negotiable. Sarah's voice carried the weight of Earth's combined military might. The Hegemony will immediately cease all military operations against its member species. Each world will be given the choice, independence, or continued association under a new charter of equal rights. Supreme Counselor Vax Tith, his once immaculate robes now creased and stained, rose from his seat. You cannot simply dismantle 10,000 years of order. The chaos will. The chaos, Sarah cut him off, began when you murdered an innocent child to maintain your grip on power. But let's be honest, it began long before that, didn't it? The Nexari weren't the first species you've tried to starve into submission. The Athendi weren't the first you've stripped of resources. We've seen your secret archives. The chamber doors opened, admitting a stream of representatives from various species. Many wore the marks of recent combat. Bandages, hastily repaired environmental suits, scorch marks on ceremonial armor. They were the leaders of the rebel factions, those who had turned against the Hegemony during the battle. The collective of free worlds, Sarah gestured to the newcomers, has already ratified a new charter. 57 species have pledged to work together as equals, not masters and slaves. The question isn't whether the old order will fall, Counselor. The question is whether the Hegemony species will join us peacefully or fade into irrelevance. In orbit above the chamber, Admiral James Chen watched the proceedings through secure feeds. Colonel Martinez stood at his side, monitoring the tactical displays that showed fleet movements throughout the sector. The Praxi Empire is mobilizing along their border, Sophia reported. They're trying to take advantage of the Hegemony's weakness, grab territory while they can. Just as we predicted, James nodded. Dr. Volkov, How many ships can we refit with the quantum metamaterial plating in the next 48 hours? Elena's hologram flickered to life nearby. We've converted 3 of the Hegemony's major shipyards to our specifications. With the new automated systems, we can upgrade perhaps 200 ships per day. But James, she hesitated, some of the member species are beginning to ask questions about our technology. They want to know why we hid it, what else we might be concealing. Let them ask. James's voice was firm. Right now, they need our protection more than they need answers. The Hegemony's collapse is creating a power vacuum, and humanity isn't the only species that's been waiting for this opportunity. On the tactical display, red icons began appearing at the edges of former Hegemony space. The Praxi weren't the only opportunists. The Swarm Collective, the Machine Intelligence, the Quantum Consciousness, powers that had stayed away from Hegemony space for millennia were now testing its borders. Back in the chamber, the debate had devolved into chaos. Species that had been enemies for generations were now forced to consider alliance, while ancient friends found themselves on opposite sides. The Athendi representative, his crystalline form glowing with barely contained energy, raised his voice above the din. The humans speak truth. For too long, we have accepted the Hegemony's lies about necessity and order. Their technology proves what some of us have long suspected. They have been deliberately suppressing advancement, keeping us dependent on their systems. And what of humanity's deception? A voice called from the shadows. Ambassador Krell of the Praxi Empire stepped into the light, his biomechanical augmentations humming softly. They hid their true capabilities, built weapons in secret. How can we trust them more than the Hegemony? Sarah's laugh was sharp and without humor. Trust. You speak of trust. We came to you openly, offering friendship and trade. The Hegemony responded by executing a child. Every step we took to protect ourselves has been vindicated by their actions. She gestured to the assembled representatives. Look around you. Look at what the Hegemony's order has brought us. Species fighting species, while greater threats gather at our borders. The Praxi build their fleets. The swarm grows hungry. And still you cling to old hatreds. In orbit, James watched new contacts appear on his tactical display. Elena, are you seeing this? Yes, the scientist's hologram leaned forward, studying the data. Quantum wake signatures, similar to our own technology, but different. More advanced in some ways, more primitive in others. It seems we're not the only ones who've been hiding things. Sophia's hands flew over her console. Multiple ships decloaking near the outer system. Configuration unknown, but energy readings are off the charts. They're broadcasting on all frequencies. A new voice filled the command center, speaking in a language that seemed to shift and change even as it was heard. Universal translators struggled for a moment before resolving it into comprehensible speech. Children of the galaxy. The voice resonated with age and power. The time of hiding is over. The precursor conclave recognizes this moment of transition. Choose wisely in the days to come. Not all who offer power can be trusted. Not all who hide strength do so out of malice. James exchanged glances with his officers. It seems the galaxy is larger than even we knew. Sophia, get me a secure channel to Earth. Elena, begin analysis of their quantum signatures. If there are more players in this game, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. In the chamber below, Sarah felt the shift in the air as the precursor transmission reached them. She watched the faces of the assembled representatives, saw the moment they realized that the galaxy they thought they knew was changing forever. The choice before us is simple. She addressed the chamber once more. We can fight each other over the scraps of the old order, or we can build something new. Together. Not as masters and servants, but as equals. Each of us has hidden strengths. Each of us has suffered under the weight of secrets. Now is the time to step into the light. The chamber fell silent as her words hung in the air. The future of 1,000 worlds balanced on the edge of a knife. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, ancient powers watched and waited, wondering what humanity and its newfound allies would choose to become. A new dawn. The holographic projections danced above the conference table, showing the positions of 1,000 ships locked in an intricate orbital dance. 3 months had passed since humanity revealed its true strength, and the galaxy had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Admiral James Chen studied the display with tired eyes. The Thanatos had become the de facto headquarters for the newly formed alliance of free worlds, its quantum-shifted hull now recognized as a symbol of hope rather than fear. Around the table sat representatives from 24 species, each bringing their own hidden strengths into the light. The Praxi advance has been contained, Sofia Martinez reported, highlighting a sector of space where the predatory empire had tried to exploit the chaos. Their quantum jamming technology was impressive, but Dr. Volkov's countermeasures proved more than equal to the task. Alina's hologram nodded. They weren't expecting us to be able to adapt so quickly. None of them were. That's the real advantage humanity brought to this fight. Not our technology, but our ability to innovate, to change. And yet change brings its own challenges. A new voice interjected. Ambassador Kexley of the Nexeri, his bioluminescent patterns shifting in complex patterns, gestured to another sector of the display. The precursor conclave's warning was clear. There are powers stirring in the dark places between galaxies, drawn by our conflict. James felt the weight of command settling more heavily on his shoulders. The precursor's revelation had shaken the foundations of galactic society. The knowledge that there were species far more advanced than even humanity's hidden fleet had forced everyone to reevaluate their positions. We've confirmed unusual quantum wake signatures in the outer rim, Elena reported. Similar to our own FTL technology, but operating on principles we barely understand. Whatever's out there, it's watching us. The chamber doors slid open, admitting Sarah Chen. She'd spent the past months negotiating with former hegemony worlds, building the framework for a new galactic order. The strain showed in her face, but there was steel in her spine. The collective of free worlds has ratified the final charter, she announced. 73 species have signed, including 6 former hegemony high counselors. We're establishing a new capital on neutral ground, a space station at the galaxy's core, where all species will have equal voice. And the hegemony remnants? James asked quietly. Vaxtith and his hardliners have fled to the outer rim. Sarah's expression hardened. But they're not our biggest concern anymore. The precursor data we recovered from their archives. It changes everything. She placed a data crystal on the table. A new hologram sprang to life, showing astronomical data that made even Alina's hologram lean forward in surprise. The hegemony didn't arise naturally, Sarah continued. They were uplifted, chosen by the precursors as an experiment in guided social evolution. But they weren't the only ones. There are dozens of galactic civilizations out there, each shaped by different precursor factions with different ideologies. And now they're coming to see the results of their experiment, James concluded. The question is, what do they want? As if in answer, alarms blared throughout the ship. The tactical display erupted with new contacts. Massive vessels appearing at the edge of sensor range, their designs unlike anything seen before. Multiple quantum ruptures detected, Sophia reported, her fingers flying over her console. Energy readings are, "Sir, they're off the scale. We're being hailed." The air above the table shimmered, and a new figure appeared. It was vaguely humanoid, but composed of shifting patterns of light and energy. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Children of the experiment, the being's words translated themselves directly into their minds. You have exceeded parameters. The introduction of humanity as a control group has produced unexpected results. The question before us is simple. Are you ready for what comes next? James and Sarah exchanged glances. This was the moment humanity had truly been preparing for, not just the fall of the hegemony, but the challenge of facing what lay beyond. We are ready. Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm. Not as your experiments, but as free peoples who have learned to stand together. Whatever comes next, we face it as equals. The beam's form shifted, patterns swirling faster, bold words, but you understand so little. The hegemony was merely a test, a way to prepare you for greater challenges. The true threats to this galaxy's peace lie beyond your comprehension. Then help us comprehend, James joined his wife. Not as masters uplifting servants, but as teachers guiding students. We've proven we can overcome our differences, that we can build something stronger than the old order. The beam was silent for a long moment. Around them, more precursor ships appeared, their very presence seeming to bend the fabric of space. Perhaps, it finally said, there is wisdom in your words. The old methods have failed. The hegemony became corrupt, stagnant. But your solution, hiding strength until it was needed, building trust through shared adversity. This is new. Interesting. We offer a compromise. Sarah proposed. Share your knowledge with all species equally. Let us learn and grow together. In return, we'll face these greater threats you speak of, not as your experiments, but as your allies. The beam's form stabilized slightly. You would trust us so easily. Trust is earned, James replied, just as we earned the trust of our allies by helping them break free from oppression. Show us these threats. Help us prepare. Let us prove that your experiments have produced something worthy of preservation. The being seemed to consider this. Finally, it gestured, and new holograms appeared. Images of things that defied description, threats that made even the hegemony seem insignificant. Very well, it declared. We will try this new approach. But know this, the challenges ahead will test more than your technology or your military might. They will test your unity, your principles, your very concept of civilization. Sarah reached out and took James's hand, thinking of Maya. Their daughter's death had set these events in motion. But her spirit, her innocence, her curiosity, her belief in the possibility of friendship between different peoples, lived on in what they were building. We're ready, she said simply. As the precursor ships moved into formation around the Alliance fleet, James looked out at the stars. Humanity had hidden its strength for generations, preparing for a war they thought would be their greatest challenge. Instead, they had found something far more difficult and far more rewarding: the challenge of building peace. The galaxy was changing. Old alliances were dying, new ones being born. And somewhere out there in the darkness between stars, greater challenges waited, but they would face them together, not as masters and servants, not as experiments, but as equals united by choice rather than force. The price of peace had been high, but its rewards, they were beginning to learn, would be greater still.